Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to get started, please. I'm Ernest Burgess, the mayor of Rutherford County, and we have a whole team of our Solid Waste Advisory Committee people reconvening. It's been almost a year, I guess, or maybe a year since we've had a meeting. We're going to be led in this discussion tonight by our consultant team, Mr. Harvey Gershom, and he'll introduce the lady that's with him. And this is going to be a time where we revisit and even add to some of the data that was presented earlier and just sort of review in some real detail exactly where we are and what some of the steps may be necessary as we move forward. So I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Gershom and welcome everyone, and he'll have some opening remarks. And
Mayor McFarland, want to add anything? You're good. Okay. All right. Thank you, mayors.
I would remind the people that are on this committee, they have to take these mics and they have to push that little black button up to speak so everyone can hear properly, okay?
All right, thank you, mayors. Members of the Solid Waste Advisory and Steering Council, ladies and gentlemen that are here visiting. I'm Harvey Gershman, president of Gershman, Brickner & Bratton. We're a solid waste management consultant. Formed in 1980, we mainly advise in planning and implementing better solutions to how people manage their solid waste. I want to introduce the consultant team that's been helping do the work. We've got Kate Vasquez here. She's a senior consultant at GBB. Jeff Postel with Triad Environmental. Jeff is also the county's landfill engineer. Walking around outside are two people from Cooley Strategies, Dave Cooley and Terry Quillen. They are a communications firm that's helping us with keeping in touch with the public. Whoops, went the wrong way. Okay, we have an agenda. There's a lot to do here. First, we're going to do a little historical review of the activities we have done through today. Then we're going to break for a box lunch for dinner. It's okay to bring your food back to your seat. We've got special permission from the county to do that. I'll start promptly after 30 minutes for the dinner break. After dinner, we've outlined time for 3 discussions. The first one will be regarding the organizational options. How should the future of solid waste management in the county be organized or unorganized, as the case may be? The second will be regarding the options. What should the future system management options look like, and when should those be made to happen? The third will be a discussion of what actions the SWAC wants as a follow-up to this meeting. Regarding the organizational options and the management options. The third, after that, we'll look to adjourn on or before 9 o'clock. It'd be great if the SWAC has a crystal clear view of the future, but that's probably an unrealistic expectation. But hopefully there will be some action items that come from the discussion and consensus that can be reached. This is a comment about public input. We know there's a lot of people in the audience. This is great that there's so many here and that you want to be heard. This committee meeting is not an open public meeting as such. It was not advertised as such. And, you know, with the closing of the county's C&D landfill, there's been a lot of extra interest besides worrying about what happens when Middle Point landfill reaches its capacity. The SWAC has been given in the draft report our recommendations. We were asked to give our recommendations based on the analysis, and that's what's in there. They'll be discussing that. Nothing has been decided as to what the future system should look like or how it would be organized. So you should know that. We do want your questions, comments, and issues We're going to be passing out cards that you can fill out and write what your concerns are, or if you've prepared something, which we're hearing there may be some things prepared, give those to us, and we will address them on the website that we've established. It's right there, www.renewalrutherford.com. It's kind of a blog page. We will address the questions promptly after this meeting tonight. We also have on the page the draft development plan that the committee has received. It's all out there, and you'll have a copy of the PowerPoint from tonight's presentation that we're using, or briefing that we're giving. So you'll have that to draw on. So please take advantage of that and give us your email address. We'll make sure the link to the web page gets to you if you'd like to share that with us. Also, you should know, if the SWAC makes recommendations, hopefully it will, to the respective, city council and county commissioners, when they consider those recommendations, there will be time for public input and discussion at future meetings that would be held to actually pass any resolution to do whatever's related to solid waste. So there's going to be plenty of time for that. I see the please read the zero waste study from Austin sign there. We have read that, and that's a very interesting analysis that Austin, Texas has done, and we briefed the committee on work like that in some cities around the country. Okay, I think enough about that, and hopefully we'll have a lot of the cards turned in. All right, let's talk about a brief project update. In the draft development plan, which is a pretty good size, as it turned out, a pretty good sized book, we've shared the summaries from workshop 1 and 2, including the PowerPoint presentations that were given at workshops 1 and 2. It's been a year to the day that since we had workshop 2. Interestingly enough. So to get ready for this, we sent this information out so the SWAC members would have a chance to read it. There is a lot of information to digest, new information beyond what was shared at workshop 1 and 2, and we understand that and look forward to what your comments will be. During workshop 1, the SWAC first learned about solid waste management in a general way. We provided background information on the county's solid waste situation and reviewed several solid waste systems in other parts of the country to provide examples of how systems are organized, funded, and what assets and services they have. To supplement this, SWAC members also were given the opportunity to see 3 nearby solid waste management sites to learn about their technologies and processing approaches. Then in workshop 2, the SWAC was provided its input on organizational and management approaches and gave some direction on preferences. There was also a survey of the SWAC members to rank different methods and approaches. After workshop 2, the working group, which consists of some city staff, county staff, and the consultant team, were given assignments. We were asked to focus on the analysis of the options and include consultant recommendations drawing upon the analysis we did. During that time, Republic Services came forward with more definition to the idea of consolidating the county's landfill and theirs into a management option that we've called Middle Point 2.0. Several exchanges of what Middle Point 2.0 would look like were discussed with GBB and the working group and resulted with a draft term sheet that's included in the draft development plan. At this point, for tonight's workshop 3, we're here to have discussion and feedback from the SWAC on what was prepared by us. Just a quick picture of the 3 places that were looked at: the Huntsville Solid Waste Facility down the road a couple hours. Covanta operates a city-owned facility, an authority-owned facility that reduces the volume of waste by 90%, converts it to steam that's sold to the arsenal next door to the plant. I don't know if you visited the landfill that they had, but there's a landfill, and also Republic Services has a materials recycling facility nearby this location. Wasteway is a company that has developed a technology, a processing technology, to make what we call an engineered fuel. It's a refined fuel from waste and recover recyclables. That was visited in nearby Morrison. And lastly was a small conversion technology project that Proton Power has that takes engineered fuel, the kind that Wasteway can make, and turns it into a synthetic fuel. During the second workshop, as I mentioned before, the SWAC members were given a list of components that can be part of a solid waste management system, and then asked to rank them. Each member had 3 points with which to apply to whichever option was listed. They could use all 3 points on one or spread them out. You can see here that recycling, reduction, and education are highly rated, including having recycling capacity here in the county. The lowest ratings were for collection in the unincorporated areas, conversion technology for organics, and building a new landfill somewhere in the county. Basically, there is a current condition that requires short-term action and decision-making that can affect the medium and long term. There's time to continue to consider the options, but the municipalities need to mobilize sooner rather than later. When this process started, we were told that Middle Point had 5 years capacity left. As we got into it and hearing feedback from both Republic Services and the state, the time frame has extended to 8 to 12 years of capacity left. In our analysis, we've assumed 10 years of capacity at the current rate of supply that Republic Services has. SWAC members were more in favor of long-term disposal options outside the county, and they supported more recycling in order to establish and meet goals and reduce the cost impacts of future options. Now, in the past year, since we last had the workshop, we've been doing a number of things. I'm going to review them briefly. We've had discussions with the mayors about how they feel about the options, both organizational and management. We've learned about the status of the county's landfill, the cost for closing and taking care of it for 30 years as required by the state. We've gathered information about waste generation, population, so we could make projections into the future for waste and develop cost models for each of the management options that we analyzed. And as I mentioned, we started having discussions with Republic, who came forward with the Middle Point 2.0 concept in more detail, and we went back and forth a few times on the term sheet that you see in the draft report, the draft development plan. And we've had several drafts of this development plan that's resulted in this draft that you have now, with all the analysis that's there. Okay, I'm going to stop at this point and ask for committee members to make some comments about what we've done to date and ask any comments related to the draft development plan. After we break for dinner, we're going to focus on the organizational options and then on the management options. Does anyone want to make any comments at this point? Okay, no one wants to break the ice? All right, then we're going to break for a box lunch, and we'll come back in 30 minutes. So there's, pick your box. I don't know what the choices are, and there's some tea over there as well. Can you use your mic? 30 minutes is too long? If you want
Harvey,
15
let's just grab our stuff. We're going to eat and work while we present.
Okay.
Sound good?
Well, why don't we just take a break for about 15 minutes then, and I'll start up again. Okay? All right, thank you. All right, everyone. We're going to continue. So if I can have your attention again. If you're still talking, you're not listening. Okay, thank you. I want, Kate's going to talk about the organizational options while we're munching away a little bit more. Kate?
Thanks, Harvey. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit here about some of the organizational options that the SWAC reviewed and are discussed in the draft development plan and the consulting recommendation. There were 4 options that were sort of derived from the feedback that Harvey just discussed from the survey and from the ranking activity that was done at the second workshop. And you see them represented here on the slide. The first one is, these are sort of the nicknames that they were given, the no action, go it alone. This is to just let the Middle Point landfills close as scheduled, and all the local governments would seek out disposal facilities on their own as sort of retail customers, negotiating the best rates that they can on their own with whatever facilities are available at the time. The next is interlocal agreements. This is a situation where 2 or more of the localities agree to have one of the governments, which it would likely be the county, but not necessarily, act on their behalf to procure disposal capacity for them. And then they kind of go in together on a contract and get some economy of scale. So a creation of a solid waste authority is where 2 or more of the localities create a solid waste authority pursuant to the Tennessee Solid Waste Authority Act of 1991. And we're going to talk about that one a little more in the subsequent slides. The first mission of the authority would be to pursue transfer and/or disposal capacity for its members. And a regional solid waste authority is very similar, but it would involve municipalities outside Rutherford County, such as neighboring counties that are current customers of Middle Point. Per state law, the regional authority would have to consist only of governments from your current solid waste region, which is the counties to the south and east. It doesn't include Nashville, just for a point of information. As discussed in the development plan, the consulting team's recommendation is that a solid waste authority be created, and so we're going to look at some of the reasons why. The motivations for an authority generally are that you have the autonomous authority and it's responsible for making decisions on a day-to-day basis and for conducting long-term planning. Some of the benefits are that the authority has a lot of powers, it takes some of the liabilities and off of the member governments, and it can incur debt that doesn't affect the debt burden of its members. The authority also has the ability to enact flow control, which means that they can, for example, require all the waste within the county be delivered to a certain place or exclude waste from outside the authority from being delivered to its facilities. The authority staff are accountable to the public via the board members, who are generally appointed by the member governments, but the nature of their employment somewhat insulates them from politics. This table shows some of the benefits and challenges, not pros and cons, but benefits and challenges of creating an authority. The challenges you see in the right-hand column are some of the things that we would need to work on overcoming during the process of creating an authority. One that frequently comes up is the idea of new fees or taxes. This is often a rearrangement of costs that people currently pay, but in a different way. So it's very important to make sure that that is all clear to everyone during the process of how is the authority going to be created and funded. The benefits, which we've talked about a little bit already, include the greatest economies of scale and isolating some of those costs directly from the budgeting process because the authority makes and spends its money. This is an example of the mission, vision, and values that could drive a solid waste authority. These are derived from the Tennessee Solid Waste Plan, Tennessee State Solid Waste Plan. Creating of these would be part of the initialization process of creating an authority. You can see the mission there is described as providing planning and services to the members and, of course, protecting the environmental resources of the county. Its vision and ambition is to fulfill the state solid waste management plan. And some possible values, which again, these are derived from the state plan, are shown there in the colored squares. Importantly, you have dedication to quality of life. Okay, I skipped one, I'm sorry. Okay, so as part of preparing this recommendation, read the Solid Waste Authority Act, and it has broad powers for the authority, but it has some interesting stipulations about the name of the authority, that it needs to reflect the members and their geography and history without being tied to exclusively to political subdivisions. So we researched some possible names, and you see them here as ideas of how the authority would address the entirety of the members and the entirety of the county as a place and as a community with history, and to reflect that the approach of an integrated approach to solid waste, we're suggesting material management authority. So at this time, we'd like to ask if any of members of the SWAC want to share thoughts about the information that was provided about creating an authority, any questions about that, or any discussion about the consulting team's recommendation to create an authority. Yes, Mayor.
Are you yet going to discuss a regional solid waste authority? Is it yet to come, or you just talking about an authority for Rutherford counties is what you've discussed so far? What is your vision, or what is your take on what we should do, or should we even consider a regional solid waste authority?
The current recommendation is for a county solid waste authority, likely consisting of the county and the city and any of the other cities that want to join. It is going to be a considerable undertaking, and the authority is being immediately created to address a very specific issue. So I think, and I think Harvey agrees, that initially it would be focused on being a county authority. It's not precluded to be larger at some point in the future, but I think that the recommendation right now is a county-based authority.
The reason for a regional authority would be some larger asset like a waste energy plant. And right now, well, we'll get into the economics of that. You could implement, I'll call it the county-oriented authority. Later, if someone wants to join it, they could join it. If that's someone outside of the county region, we believe that's allowed. And then the authority would sort of morph into covering a bigger region. We've seen authorities do that. You know, they were formed for, say, 4 jurisdictions in 1980. I'm referring to a specific one. Today, they have, I think, 7 or 8 jurisdictions that are part of that authority. They came in because they wanted that authority to use its project management capabilities and bonding authority to implement some capital-intensive projects. And I think, you know, if something came along where you wanted to do something that was more capital, you know, very capital-intensive, that required more participants to keep the costs regional, that would be the time at which to consider that.
I wonder if you could go a little bit further with talking about just the participation of the jurisdictions, all of the jurisdictions in Rutherford County, and how that really might be an important part of this whole discussion about whether the Solid Waste Authority could really be effective and efficient.
Yes, thanks. The more participants and the more balance to the authority and its operating base, the more stable and effective it can be. one of the functions of the authority would be to gain economy of scale that would help with the expected increase for disposing of waste when Middle Point landfill ultimately closes. There are many different ways to fund an authority based on what the members are receiving. There are authorities where there's a base level funding from every part, and then if more people get more services, for example, inside the city, there are households that have curbside. If that becomes part of the mission and activity of the authority, there's a contribution to the authority for that. The authority can simply be a contracting body and everyone is their customer, or they can provide services directly. This is all the type of thing that would be discussed during the implementation by the governments that join the authority.
Having all the jurisdictions part of the county authority gives you the greater opportunity to have consistency of services, particularly for waste reduction and recycling, where everyone has access and they have access to similar services. They follow the same rules. It's all consistent, and the system is there for everyone versus having little pockets of individuality, which, what do I do over here? Well, I'm over here now, in terms of, particularly in terms of recycling. It would be a great advantage to have everyone on the same page there.
Any other questions about an authority, either forming it or how it might look? Yes.
Button on the bottom somewhere.
Going back to the first slide, the third bullet, flow control from outside the authority and within, can you talk a little bit more about how it is that an authority can do something that we haven't been able to do in the past?
The key difference between the issue as I understand it at present and this power of the authority has to do with ownership of the facility. If the authority, for example, owned and operated a transfer station, the authority could enact flow control involving that transfer station. The authority could not enact flow control over a privately owned and operated facility. That's the difference, I think, that you're asking about between right now. Mm-hmm.
The public sector has to own it. Doesn't necessarily have to operate it. The ownership is the key, and it's on solid waste facilities, not on recycling facilities, that you can apply the flow control. Recyclables can go anywhere. The way to control the recyclables indirectly is by providing the collection services that collect the recyclables. Then by contract or by your own means, you have the recyclables collected and you take them to the facility of your choice, that you've contracted with, that you've built, whatever, wherever it might be.
Question, please. So, on the authority, if each municipality joined in on the authority, I presume that there's a board
Correct.
created. Would all municipalities have equal representation on that authority?
You would have to decide on that. We actually met with legal counsel from the city of Murfreesboro and the county today to talk about that. And the concept was that, well, the law requires, and Kate will correct me if I'm not saying this right, that there's at least one representative from every member. A lot of times authority membership gets weighted toward population. Funding gets weighted toward population, as well as, the services that are eventually provided. In the document, we've outlined a membership profile, if you will, of 3 from the city of Murfreesboro, 3 from the county, and 1 from the smaller cities, if they so chose. Having a board of 7 to 9, that's about, I think, a manageable size that we suggested in the report.
So just as a quick follow-up, first of all, I'm not implying that Smyrna, Laverne, and Eagleville, smaller municipalities, would be treated any differently than Murfreesboro or the county, but there's no potential there for us to be treated any differently with respect to whatever actions come out of that authority, is there, given that there's more representatives from the other two municipalities?
Well, my experience with authorities is that it ends up being more of a consensus, activity. Whoever's on the board from wherever they are, they kind of decide as a group what they want to do. You don't see a lot of, votes having to be broken, if you will, or tie votes. But being part of it, if you didn't have representation on that board and you were getting services, you might have more questions because you weren't involved in the discussion. But having representation on the board and, being part of the decisions that are made, you would feel more comfortable and also be able to explain that to your constituents, versus sitting on the sideline and watching, even though you're being treated fairly, probably. But there's always that doubt, if you will, that might come into play if you're not at the table. Well, that was fast.
Kind of along the same line, but not in relation to the local government's representation, but to the variation across the county in how concentrated the population and businesses are. Would the authority be able to effectively manage the provision of services to areas that might be more or less expensive by providing more or less comprehensive or more or less frequent services in some areas than others?
So the services that are provided could be all universal, everybody gets the same. Not a good idea, given the demographics of this county. You've got a big variation of population densities, so you need to have a more flexible, delivery of services. Now you have 19 recycling centers that the county manages. The city manages one. There's organized collection in the city and open market collection, everywhere else for commercial as well as residential. So there's opportunities to make that more efficient, but if people don't want, service directly at their property, you can set up the system so they have access to it in a different way through recycling centers or convenience centers that are still there. That's a decision to be made, by the authority and its members, so that people, feel good about the system and they have choices, but they're still paying their fair share. For example, in an area where, in a rural area where the household wants to take their waste to a recycling center, their fee would be, structured so that they're paying for that kind of service. Where you're getting curbside service, for waste, recyclables, whatever, your fee would be higher because you're getting more service. But people are paying their fair share. It requires, more administration, but it's not rocket science, and it can be done.
Would the authority itself be autonomous? Will it set the fees and then or is it mandatory?
Well, that would be for the authority to decide, how much choice it wanted to give people. I think everybody, if you had it to be for everybody would be charged something because they'd have access to the system in some way. In the county I live in, the rate schedule, there must be, 24 different charges to different kinds of customers based on where they live in the county, what service they get, if there's leaf collection, if there's not leaf collection, do they have any collection? It's, and you would do it that way, but everyone would be charged something for having access to the service. The authority would be set up as an enterprise so that it raised enough revenue to cover its costs. It's not a profit-making organization. It would set aside reserve funds to take the ups and downs of, the marketplace for the sale of various products that might be recovered from the services, from recycling, from energy recovery, whatever, but it's all open book, and the fees are, adequate to cover the costs and not anything more. And some authorities contract out for all the services. Some authorities operate some things themselves and contract out for other services. You try to do what's efficient so that the rates are as low as possible. It's a utility mentality that authorities take in designing the services and the rates. It's more equitable than, a general funding approach where, people get different levels of service, but everyone's paying, if you will, through their property taxes, what their tax rate is, versus for the service they get. It's more consumer-oriented than paying for solid waste services through your general fund.
The county Harvey is talking about, I like the way they explain their fee structure is each ratepayer pays for what they get and only what they get. So there are different rates for different types of users of the system based on the benefit they derive. And an authority has that ability because of its utility mindset, as Harvey said.
All right, I'm gonna do some relative. Let's say you live in the rural area and you use a recycling center to drop off your waste and your recyclables. $100 a year, might be your charge, as compared to someone who gets curbside service with carts for waste, recyclables, yard waste collection in brown bags with a cart, maybe some organics in the cart, something like that. They might pay $25 times 12. What's that? $300 a year. Thank you. In comparison. So that might be the range of, order of magnitude of service cost for everyone to have access to the system via self-haul, or to have access to the system by having a truck or trucks come to your home to pick up the waste.
And I think it bears, that's to show magnitude. Those aren't
Yeah, that's
estimated actual.
This plan, the planning here does not include that kind of analysis. That's a different analysis. But that's generally, where that would come out in, relative numbers. The other good thing about an authority is that you can raise capital, supported by the rate structure that you set up from your customers. And it's very financeable, and the cost of capital is relatively inexpensive. And it keeps the cost of service down. If you have to build a transfer station or, some other asset, buy a bunch of trucks, buy a bunch of carts, whatever you're buying, it keeps the cost of financing down, and the cost of the service tends to be less versus more.
Are we really just talking about residential customers? What about our business customers? Does your county manage both of those groups?
The county that I'm in has requirements for commercial recycling, and charges commercial properties based on the type of business and square footage they have. But they also charge the hauling of that waste from commercial establishments is open market. Anyone can establish a customer relationship. And for those haulers to use the county transfer station, there's a tipping fee that's charged. The residential haulers that are under contract through the county system that collect at my home, for example, tip at the county transfer station without charge because I've paid for that disposal charge and the collection service through my user fee. So now there's other counties and other cities where commercial collection is controlled. They'll select a contractor to provide all the services. They'll do it themselves, perhaps. That's less of a case. To provide a consistent service and have the waste and recyclables from those customers flow to the system that they want it to flow to to reach higher diversion rates. And that's, I don't want to call it a trend, but it's starting to catch on in some places, particularly in California. New York City is trying to do that too. And the main motivation is traffic and diversion, increased diversion. So there's less waste destined for disposal.
Our recommendation doesn't address that particularly as a separate or an isolated point of information.
Right now, the county and the city of Murfreesboro control about 80,000 tons of the 280,000 tons that we estimate are in the county. So there's about 200,000 tons that's open market, that customers, whether it's residential and commercial, decide who they'd like to get service from, make a phone call, sign a contract, and enter into a relationship for service at their property. And where we haven't gotten into in this, that's sort of a second order discussion once you decide on how you want to go forward and to what level you want to cause recycling and diversion to happen. That's where that conversation, that's when that conversation, should come up. People have caused a lot of recycling to happen without controlling the commercial marketplace by setting up, stringent requirements that the authority could monitor and provide assistance to help businesses, change how they set their waste out. It's tedious, but it does work, and a lot of people have adopted that. Kate used to be a recycling coordinator in a large county in Virginia, Fairfax, where that was part of her job. And she made a lot of commercial recycling happen without affecting, who was doing the collection.
Single-handedly, no, I'm not. Are there any other questions on this topic? Oh, yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
I want to talk about option 2 just for a second, and particularly how setting up the authority differentiates from what is the Rutherford County Management?
Yes.
Between those two, in particular, as we transfer, if we go with an authority-based organization, transfer from municipalities owning and operating the assets and everything, and moving it to the authority, what that might look like and why the authority is better than option 2.
So interlocal, you're asking what's the difference between interlocal agreements and a solid waste authority functionally, or just?
Basically, I mean, I know what it is functionally, but you
okay.
list the reasons why you would not recommend that as opposed to the authority.
Correct, okay.
And so those are very distinct differences, but that's essentially, we don't function that way now. I guess we all are going alone right now, I guess. Is that the way you would describe what our current status is?
Current status is everyone's doing their own thing,
Right.
or
So
not.
that's option 1, right?
That's option one.
that's
Just it continues the way it is, and all of a sudden the stuff needs to go in a different direction, and you're not prepared for it.
So an interlocal agreement, one of the advantages that the authority would have over the interlocal agreement is clarity of mission and all the powers that are granted to the authority by the state. The interlocal agreement would have to be defined entirely by the memoranda of understanding and the interlocal agreements among the members. And whichever party was doing the work behind the agreement would bear an operational burden that would have to be negotiated and reevaluated frequently. The authority has powers that are granted to it by the state that the interlocal agreement would not have. For example, Harvey talked about capitalization. If capital was needed for something, someone would have to issue the debt as opposed to the authority issuing the debt. So the possibilities for an interlocal agreement are not as broad in scope as the authority.
Major decisions would continue to be driven by, elected officials, within the jurisdictions, whether they can work together, or not now in the future. And if the county were the lead, which is what the interlocal agreement option is, it's the county because it's the more of an umbrella organization, jurisdiction than anyone else. Incorporated cities, yes, within it. So each city would need to enter into an agreement, but the and every year, the county would have to, look at its budget, have it be, taken into account, with whatever else is going on in the county. It just makes it more complicated to make decisions in a more timely way. The advantage of an authority is it can act more like a business, versus an elected body, which oftentimes takes longer to make decisions, may not make a decision, just protract, and as a result, things may not go as well. And, I'm not referring to anything here because I don't know your history, but, and if the future system requires, assets, significant assets, that becomes part of the county's, asset and responsibility and liability, and would hopefully have interlocal agreements that spread that, but it would need to service that. And it puts the decisions back on the elected officials of the county to work with the elected officials of the other jurisdictions who may or may not want to sign up.
Going with the Solid Waste Authority, you would have the ability to have set leaders that could, because with local government, any government, you've got some type of election every 4 years.
Right.
So with your Solid Waste Authority, you could potentially have members on there that would sit on there, and then the board would be established of the, like the 3-3 and then 1-1 for the other local governments. But is there more stability with the Solid Waste Authority in that?
Yeah, there's a
Essentially,
6-year,
with an election year, it could change because,
right.
I mean, sitting here, nobody really wants the garbage in their backyard. So that could be a selling point or not during a local election. But if you had the authority, they basically are not governed by said.
Right. The membership is named in the resolution that the jurisdiction passes, and the term per the state law is 6 years.
Yeah.
That they would serve for 6 years, and they would need to be renewed or replaced by that same jurisdiction, every 6 years. So that provides more stability than 4 years.
But you would have,
Say that again? In the county, it would be the city of Murfreesboro, Rutherford County, and other incorporated cities, Smyrna, Laverne, and Eagleville, if they wanted to participate.
So they have the option to opt in or opt out then, is that what you're saying?
That's what that would be up to other authority members to open their arms or close their arms. And I'm hearing they would rather have the other cities participate than sit on the sideline and be part of it, so you're all in this together.
And as it should be, but just, I don't know, I guess I'm somewhat confused about where we're at. Right now, it seems to me like we're only setting up the mechanism to make the decision on where and how the trash will be
Well,
disposed of.
deciding on an authority doesn't make any decisions with where the waste goes or what services are provided. It provides the organizational framework to do whatever that authority decides it wants to do. Okay? Any of these management approaches could be done with any of these organizational options. It's just how, which ones are less difficult to do it with, if you will. But the authority gives you a lot of flexibility, to do whatever, to not do anything on the management option and just sit there and react, but react to it as a group down the road.
But is that up to deciding eventually where the trash will go?
If you formed an authority and that was part of the authority's scope, yes, that would be, that could be part of where the trash could go. I wouldn't think, I mean, if you didn't want the authority to decide that, I don't know why you would, want to form one,
One final quick question. So, I mean, we want to be as informed as we can before we jump into any kind of authority, obviously, and I think that holds true for all of us. So how do we seek subsequent knowledge? I mean, where can we learn more about the perks other than what we are hearing here tonight of joining the authority? Or whether we ought to have autonomy with respect to what we do with our trash?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm thinking of how to respond to that.
I want to clarify the question first. You're asking how to learn more about the authority and what it might be like. So I read through the entirety of the act, and this is an act with a broad amount of powers for the municipalities that would be forming the authority to see how they would like to have it. It has a broad array of powers, but they don't all have to be enacted. So, for example, the authority is allowed to build a facility, conduct collection, hire contractors, et cetera, but it would be up to the formation of the authority to make that part of its mission or not. There's also not a mandate, because you're in the geography, to be a member of the authority in the state law, on my reading and recollection.
So I think that if the authority idea advances and resolutions are drafted, everyone would see those and decide if they wanted to have one for their community or not, and name the member. So we talked about with the councils today in about a resolution. The resolution would say the jurisdiction hereby grants participation in authority, agrees to fund the authority with some funding to get going, and designates Mr. or Miss as its designated members. So that would have to be worked out before, who those named people are and how many are named in each resolution. So there'd need to be some meetings amongst, the cities and the county in coordinating that so that the resolutions were similar and the people in all that is done. And if the cities, if all the cities are in, the county doesn't need to raise the money for the cities. The cities would raise their own respective money. And we talked about a per capita basis as initially capitalizing the authority's activities.
Did you have another part of your question? Okay.
Just going one step further with that, let's suppose one jurisdiction didn't want to participate. Solid waste is covering everything else. So the solid waste authority would not be providing services to that jurisdiction. Is that correct?
Well, if the jurisdiction, which jurisdiction? That's not the county, right?
Let's say one of the cities.
One of the cities.
Townville?
Townville.
Townburg?
All right,
Townburg.
well, if Townville was, the authority may, if Townville people wanted to participate in the services of the authority, even though they're not a member, then the authority would need to find a way to charge the residents of Townville or the properties in Townville. Otherwise, you'd be trying to find the residents of Townville and keep them out of the system. And you could have a different rate structure for the residents of Townville. It could be higher if you're not an authority member. That's, a decision the authority would have to make, how it did that.
But it would definitely have to be a different rate structure, likely.
You could charge it, it's like, are you a member, at Sam's Club? You pay a membership fee and you get in, and hopefully you get in better prices versus if you're a non-member, or you can't shop there, however that works.
If you don't have any capital investment from that jurisdiction, then the Solid Waste Authority has certainly higher costs to support that group.
Yeah, you would, want to, I don't know, you could come up with a rate structure that charged them more to, to participate, sort of a customer at will, if you will. But the difficulty would be if you had, the smaller cities not participating is finding a way to make sure that they're not using the system unless there's a way to that they don't have access to the system or they can't gain access. I think it'd be better if everyone were in it, so you don't have to worry about that, fighting to keep people out. That's not fun.
So many questions raised by doing this. It must be a process that you have to go through to form an authority. How long does it typically take, and what does the process typically look like? It seems like what we would do if we were to, if the cities and the counties chose to go in this direction, they'd have to initiate a process of exploring exactly what this would look like, wouldn't they? And then take some time to figure out how they would structure it, and in terms of not only how they would structure the board, but how they would structure it financially and everything. So is this typically a process, and if so, how long?
I'll go speak to the state act just briefly first. There are considerable amounts of what the bylaws would be like that are laid out by the act. It is part of what is detailed in the act and instructed, which is helpful because that's one less thing you've got in there. Your typical when the president's not there, who fills in, that sort of thing, and staffing, the members and treasurer, manager. There's all you have to do is decide to do it, though. We're seeking confirmation of that, but there doesn't appear to be an approval process. So it's up to the organizations that form the authority. So it takes as long as it takes to get it right. There's not and then we turn it into TDEC and it's another however months. So that part I wanted to answer, and then I'll ask Harvey to speak from experience.
I'm going to talk about in terms of pre-resolution and post-resolution. So the resolution hasn't passed in the county and the cities. You need to get together and decide what that resolution says and who the representatives are, and pin down a few things. Not a lot. So I don't know how long that would take. First, this council needs to make a recommendation so that at least the Murfreesboro and the county can react to that, and hopefully the other 3 cities as well. I don't know, that might take 3 months to do pre-resolution, to organize what that document says. It might take 6 months. I don't know, but there's some small amount of time. The resolution takes 1 reading. An ordinance takes 2. We kind of heard this would be a resolution, taking 1 reading. So then there's a resolution, and we've got post-resolution. Those board members need to come together with some support to decide what they want to do, what they want this authority to do, to finish the planning of the management options that we're going to talk about and decide what we want to do. Do we want to operate anything? Do we want others to operate it? Which path are we going to follow? 1, 2, or 3 paths? So there's a planning phase, sort of, preparing the business plan, how it's going to charge. Then once that's done and that board accepts it, they need to go to the members and get an interlocal service agreement that says this is what we want to do for you and how we're going to charge you for services and the schedule. And that service agreement sets up the business. And then the authority knows what it needs to do. It has contracts with each of the jurisdictions over what services, the charging philosophy, maybe not exactly the rates because you don't know what the cost will be, but how those costs will be determined, and then you start implementing it. So I'm going to say from today, you might be a year and a half from, starting to implement services that the authority is providing to people. we suggested one of the things this authority should consider is rolling in the operations of Murfreesboro and the county within the authority, and bringing that under the authority's activities, so that there's some resources to do things within the authority, and it creates a more efficient, if you will, organization together versus separate, and it can do some things. That's something we suggested in the plan, but that wouldn't be decided until post-resolution. The resolution wouldn't have we're going to do A, B, and C. It would have a broad capability, and then the authority decides what it wants to do. So in the report, there's some contract diagrams that kind of explain how relationships might be set up with an authority. Let's see what page that's on. Kate, to you, it's toward the back.
Section 2.
Yeah, it's on page 28 and 29. There's a contract structure for the two management approaches. Theoretic, that assume a Rutherford County authority, and contractual relationships with various parties depending upon what's going on. Any other comments or questions?
Harvey, with the Solid Waste Authority, if we're looking at management options, can we delineate or define these are the management options that the municipalities would agree on, but within the Solid Waste Authority, for example, here's one option that we would not?
If you wanted to be more specific at the resolution stage, sure, I would think you could do that.
Okay.
If you wanted to.
Some of the items we saw on the slide there about mission, vision, and values, when we were talking to council today, they suggested some of that could be described in the whereas statements and other parts of the resolutions that would be creating the authority. It might say, we're making this authority for this initial assignment or overarching mission. These are the reasons why in some of the recitations and the resolution.
Any other discussion, Mayor?
Ask some of these questions. This probably is going to take some continued outside assistance from some consultants such as GBB or someone else. So I just want to point out that we've just about used up our, I guess you could say, our funds that have been allocated to the process that we're in now. So if this discussion needs further assistance, we're going to all have to get together and decide who it's going to be and how we're going to fund that.
Anything else on organizations? We will circle back on this at the end. I'm going to ask Dave Cooley's here, and now, Dave, say hi to people. Dave has the cards. I'm going to let him pass those out, and I'm just going to take a short bio break while Dave does that, so you have a chance to get those cards from Dave and start writing down some questions. Excuse me a minute.
So we're on schedule we'll just take maybe a little quick break here, and we'll have the cards folks have been waiting for, and we will start back it's 6:19, at 6:30. Is that okay? Or do you guys want 5 minutes? 5 minutes. Mayor says 5 minutes.
All right. Anyone think of anything else to discuss about organizational options before I go on to management options? Go ahead.
I just had one other thought, and that is that it might be useful to consider if the if the cities in the county decide to move in this direction, having memorandums of understanding among them to begin the process of exploring what this might look like, to kind of raise the comfort level and set out some parameters to guide them as they go through that process.
Sort of laying out the process and steps and schedule, and okay, that's a very good idea. That sounds like work that into an output of the SWAC tonight as a recommendation. That's a good idea. I like that. Anyone have anything else? Okay. Management options. All right, we, per direction from SWAC, we were asked to analyze 4 management options. And these are the short names for them. No assets, no programs, basically continuing with what's happening now without any, I'll say, governmental effect, local governmental effect on changing things. And basically, you know, whatever the cost is, the cost is. Wherever the outlets are, the outlets are. And you decide, you know, on an individual basis where they, where you go. Middle Point, we're told, will fill up in 8 to 12 years. So the services that the county and the city of Murfreesboro get from Republic Services would end at that time, as would the financial benefits that come along with that would end in the no assets, no programs management option. Middle Point 2.0, when this started, that wasn't even being thought about. But it kind of evolved with some discussions with Republic that is there something that could be done to change the capacity situation because the benefits that the city and the county receive are, you know, fairly significant. So it's a plan that I'm going to go into it in more detail, but it involves basically taking, you know, the small county hill and the larger Middle Point hill, and instead of them having a big valley in between, they connect. They don't go up any higher, but they connect to use that space that's in between, and the 2 landfills are consolidated. And the preliminary estimates of that would add another 15 years to the 8 to 10 years, 8 to 12 years, and we've assumed 10, to the life of Middle Point at the current rates of delivery. What's also in the term sheet, if you've read it, it transfers the liability of the county landfill for both the unlined municipal waste cell part that's been already closed, and the C&D to Republic Services. So the county doesn't have to close the C&D landfill, it doesn't have to do the post-closure, and it eliminates future environmental liability from still the county continuing to own that disposal location. That's a significant benefit to the county. The waste that's there, what's being discussed is to relocate that waste into lined cells so that the environment is protected in, you know, in fully lined what's called subtitle D kind of cells instead of being in unlined cells as they currently are. We've gone back and forth a few times with the term sheet. It's still a draft. No decisions have been made, but it reflects what Republic Services feel feels at this point in time what might be able to be done. They need access to the county landfill to do some investigations of what's in the ground, what they would really have to deal with to confirm their business model and the economic offerings that are in the preliminary term sheet. The host community fees, the special rate for disposal services that are in there, that would all need to be confirmed based on their investigation. So they have, that's not something they're ready to sign a contract on, nor is it something that you all are ready to sign a contract on either. It's a option that's been flushed out to a fair degree for consideration. And we use the assumptions in that term sheet to do the cost estimates, the analysis that we did, which I'll explain. The max flex, or maximum flexibility, is a management system that looks ahead at having at least 2 locations in the county for taking your waste. Initially, a southern transfer station would be added, and if it's added soon enough, it could deliver waste to Middle Point in 20-ton loads instead of in smaller loads, so there's a little less traffic going to Middle Point while it's still open. If Middle Point 2.0 is implemented, that smaller amount of reduction in traffic would continue. And the second transfer station would happen more toward after Middle Point is closed, whether it's Middle Point now or Middle Point 2.0. Republic has expressed interest to have that site be a site for a north transfer station. Doesn't have to be a site for the north transfer station, but they've expressed interest in that. Also in Middle Point 2.0, they've expressed interest to locate a recycling facility there that could process source-separated recyclables from residences and businesses. So what the maximum flexibility management approach gives you is the ability to, when Middle Point closes, is to direct the trucks to another landfill outside of the county. I'm assuming there's no regional waste energy plant when I say this, as for reasons I'll explain. Well, you saw the reasons. But to do a competitive procurement to say, okay, who's out there with landfill resources, and give us your best price and we'll take the waste there, what's left after the recycling programs that are implemented. And you would go to the lowest cost transfer and disposal location from the south transfer station, and later from a north location. As your county grows, having a north location will be important to have, so that efficient transportation of waste outside the county is done. Now, if a waste energy project, regional or otherwise, happens to become feasible, comes out of the ground or whatever, that could be the north transfer station. Or if it's not too far away from the northern border, that could be a haul direct. But that's something off into the future to start thinking about once you're within 6 years of Middle Point closing, whether it's Middle Point now or Middle Point 2.0. So that's what maximum flexibility is. Oh, I didn't say what regional waste energy is. Regional waste energy is a big waste energy plant. Anyone remember what Nashville Thermal was? It's not like Nashville Thermal was. The best example of current technology for waste energy is in Palm Beach County, Florida, where they recently implemented a 3,000 ton per day plant. It cost $660 million. Was it 4, 5, 6 years ago? And it's running really well. It's got the latest technology. It's a beautiful facility. Education, is part of it. They have rain, rain barrels, they collect all the rain. I mean, it's just got a lot of bells and whistles that make it look good as well as operate as efficiently as it can from an air pollution standpoint. It's a very clean facility and well-run by the contractor that built it for the county. That's their second plant there. That's the kind of technology we'd be talking about in this regional waste energy plant. The problem with that option is where are you going to site it? And where's all the waste going to come from? You don't have enough waste for a large facility that's only making electricity. Electricity is fortunately for a consumer, but unfortunately for a waste energy project, it's very inexpensive. And these plants are very expensive. From a capital standpoint, you're almost putting them as much into generating the heat from burning the waste as you are from cleaning up the air emissions that come out from burning the waste. There's a lot of technology and costs on the air pollution control system to make sure that the emissions are very, very clean. So you need to have higher valued power, being able to sell the power for more money. We projected 4.5 cents in this pro forma that we used in this cost estimate, and that maybe even be generous in this marketplace here. So having a energy project that includes a steam customer, a 24/7 more industrial steam customer would be preferable if one were thinking about a waste energy project. Then you've got to track the waste, the extra waste, to get the size up. And that makes it regional and makes it more difficult to do. And you've got to pick a site where this would go that has reasonable access to the transmission lines, high voltage transmission system, water for the cooling, for the turbines and the cooling system, and making the steam. So that's not, I mean, that takes some effort. So that's a difficult management option. And right now, with energy economics, as you'll see in the cost, it doesn't pencil out very well. All right, so we came up with costs. So the first graph, I don't know if, Kate, can you run the pointer on the first graph? This is 20 years of cumulative net present value cost for that system. Now, this is the incremental cost that this approach would have on the different users. In your report, we've got it by incremental cost to the county, to the city, to the private haulers, and then the total system. So this is extra cost that would have to be paid as you implemented this over 20 years. So on average, the no asset ends up being about $6.5 million extra per year for everyone. The middle point 2.0 ends up being about $3 million extra per year for everyone. Maximum flexibility ends up being about $83 million per year extra for everyone. And the regional waste energy ends up being 21. Did I do that right? Excuse me, I said 83 for max, it's 8.3, excuse me. And the waste energy is 21 million extra per year. The mayor's asked, well, how much is that per household per month? And that's what the next slide over with the yellow bars has. So the no asset is about $2.22 or $25 extra a year. And this has been allocated to the households only. So we looked at how much of your property taxes is paid by households, residences, versus businesses. And we apportioned the cost over on the left just to the households to get on a per household basis. So the household would need to have $25 more on its tax bill to cover the no asset about $12 on the middle point, 3 times 12, about $36 on the Max Flex, 7 times 12, that's about a little less than $90 per year. Just to give you an idea of the extra cost over and above. And there are slides on for each of the groups. So what happens for the city and the county with the benefits that they get, they lose those benefits and costs jump up significantly after the 10th year. And when you look at the spreadsheet, you'll see the changes. It's all there in black and white, and if you print it in color, there's some red in there too, to show how we did this. This is not the cost of services to those places for what they get. We're assuming they're paying what they're paying, and these are the extra costs that the city, the county, and the private haulers that are serving the open market would need to pass along to their customers. Okay, that's the viewpoint of this analysis. Any questions about that? Because this is kind of this was not easy to do. I mean, and we were trying to have this reflect the term sheet as well when we did this. But we think we're pretty close, and if we made any mistakes, they're probably relative to each other. So what's important is the differences, not the exact number, but the differences between them, because we use the same methodology as we went from one to the other. Okay. All right, so we were asked to make a recommendation, and with this information, we think it's worth pursuing Middle Point 2.0 and the Max Flex at the same time through a solid waste authority and see what happens with the numbers on Middle Point 2.0 and see what that, what that could mean, and start developing the Max Flex with at least the southern transfer station as a project that should be implemented. Meanwhile, you consider, all the recycling and, collection stuff as a separate. It really doesn't depend on, where you end up with disposal. That's a separate set of activities, and you all have indicated strong interest in that, so the authority could pursue that. You can't pick one or the other now. I mean, you could exclude Middle Point 2.0 certainly, but you need to have at least a southern transfer station so that you're positioned for the future with at least part of the county being able to go somewhere else when Middle Point closes, whether it's Middle Point as it is now in 10 years or Middle Point 2.0 in 25 years. Anyway, that's what we recommended and why. The liability that the county would shift is significant, and the savings and cost for everyone are significant with Middle Point 2.0 as it's conceptualized today. Conceptualized. Okay. Discussion of the options, the system options. While the Solid Waste Advisory Council is thinking about what to ask, there's a typo on the card. Renewal Rutherford with an R on the bottom. So if you've got the card, just keep that in mind. And we want you to fill these out and turn these in, please. Just bring them up here at the end, and we will answer these as quickly as possible and post it on the web page within 10 days. Kate, did you see that? Within 10 days. Okay. And if you want to give us your name and email address, we'll make sure that you're on an email inform list when there's something new posted on the web page, so you can see it. Thank you. All right, back to the council.
Harvey, question for you. We have been talking about recycling for many moons, and my personal opinion is it's time to act on a recycling program within the county. If we proceed with transfer stations or a regional recycling program in the county, and I know, first of all, that would have to be based on density. You know, subdivisions in the county that have some density, we couldn't do it countywide. Do you envision that we would pick up trash at subdivisions and recyclables separate at the curb, or do you have a transfer station or stations that would separate recyclables from the trash at a location at the transfer station?
Separately set out at the curb, preferably in carts, large carts. You know, every other week is kind of a best practice that we work with. So households would have a 96-gallon rolling cart, and you would put in the recyclables of choice that the processor knew they could market, and you'd collect it. You could have that service be provided to households that are within areas that have, this or more density, and others could have access to dropping off the same kind of recyclables at a recycling center, convenience center that was part of the system. So everyone could have access, or they could opt in and ask for service if they were in a less densely populated area. Just pay a different rate, because the distance, what keeps the cost down is the distance between stops is shorter. And that could be part of what the authority provides. Hire a contractor, expand the services the city of Murfreesboro provides that got rolled into the authority as an example. Those are choices that you would have. Then you've got to have the stuff processed. Right now, the closest processing facilities are in Nashville, one further away in Huntsville. And recyclables are expensive to process. And the markets, we're in a state of flux right now. We're adjusting to China turning down its demand on our recyclables. And we need places domestically for recyclables to go to. That's a whole nother issue, and that might be something also the authority could help do, bring some industries to the county perhaps that can convert your recyclables and others into products that can go into cars or go into something that is manufactured in the region. We need to do that as a nation, not just here, but that's a whole another level.
Yeah, I've got to think that the majority of the general public don't understand that recyclables are sold on the market as a commodity, just like wheat, oranges, precious metals, and they go up and down. And right now they're in a down market, and it costs the county, it's a loss leader for us, really. Yep. It costs us money. We go in the hole on recyclables to haul and take to Alabama or other places.
Yeah, if the contracts are set up for recycling where the processor takes the market risk, it's not a good arrangement. The public sector or you need to have that risk shared, and recycling is not free, although it's basically been presented as a free service. That cost of service has been rolled into the cost of, quote, garbage. That's how Austin, Texas does it. They don't charge for recycling service, they charge for waste collection service based on the size of the waste cart. And recycling's, quote, free, but it's not free. It's expensive to process recyclables, and then you've got to sell the stuff. And it's getting harder to sell the stuff. The curbside bin, before China turned things off, sorted and sold was worth about $135 per ton when China started turning things off, the curbside bin sorted and sold dropped to $80 a ton in a non-deposit state. When I say a non-deposit state, that's a state that has deposits on containers and allows that revenue to go back to the processors. California and Hawaii allow that. And that law creates a revenue potential of about $35, $40 per ton for the processors, help keep processing in those states alive when the markets came down. That's a lot of money. But it's a commodity. That's a big swing. If I ran those numbers, 20 years ago, the value was about $35, $40 a ton for that curbside bin sorted and sold. It's really changed. And there's much less paper in the bin now, and there's much more plastic that doesn't weigh much in the bin now.
Well, I would hope whether a board or us as a group, I would hope that recycling would be high on the list as a number one item of a must-do. But going back to the options and the discussion tonight, Middle Point 2.0, a couple things I want to make a comment about that. One, and this has been widely publicized in the paper, and there's full transparency here. Would you agree that if Republic did proceed with interest in our current landfill, that there is certainly due diligence left to do on their part as far as geotechnical exploring, hydraulic exploration? They would have to, I assume, have to be re-permitted and things like that. Would you not guess that that's at least 2 years of work to do before that could even?
I'm going to turn to Jeff, our landfill engineer,
Okay.
who knows the permitting process in Tennessee a lot better than I do.
Yes, we'd be looking at probably a 1.5 to 2.5 year process.
That being said, would it be approximately 18 months or 24 months before Republic would even say to us that, yes, we have a deal, we would like to proceed with that? I mean, would it take that long for them to explore and for them to be comfortable with the options they find?
I'm going to say within 4 to 6 months from the time they do their exploratory work, they would be in a position to firm up their offer that we've got in the book, and we would know the numbers. Now, whether that can get the offer then, if you all decided to proceed with that, would be contingent upon them getting a permit, and whatever other contingencies might be also negotiated, as part of that at that time. That would be the time, after their exploratory work is done, they have a chance to confirm their business model, to update the term sheet with specifics. Think of, maybe talk about other things that would make a Middle Point 2.0 acceptable to people here as well, and then go forward with the permitting process.
And in the meantime, we could, as a body, pursue the Max Flex option, and that could be
That's
underway-
independent. That's independent of
underway.
that.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. And the sooner you'd have a south transfer station in place, the sooner less trucks from within the county would go to Middle Point, however long it's in operation. And you can also start thinking about recycling services, and making the recycling centers more efficient as well, and whatever, to doing that part. And that's totally independent of Middle Point 2.0, whether or not that's implemented. So there's a lot that should be done to make a system that's, one, more efficient from a transportation standpoint, and also is greener, and diverting waste that doesn't have to go into Middle Point 2.0, or some other landfill, 150 miles away into the future. So you should use that time to do other things and, reduce your waste. Now, that's going to, raise your costs to do that, but it's an investment into a system that can operate, into the future.
And one last question, and I'll yield the floor, and Jeff, I may lean on you for your answer on this. I want to repeat and emphasize one thing you talked about of the potential of the Middle Point 2.0 option. The which is almost too good to be true, in my opinion. If Republic is willing, as part of the deal, to accept the liability exposure that we, the citizens of Rutherford County, have with our current landfill that's closed or about to be closed. I sit on the Public Works Committee. We, nearly every month, get requests for money to go to that landfill for leachate issues that the EPA is pressuring MAC to resolve, because it is an unlined cell, and those issues are going to continue. This is an old style landfill that was built well before current regulations are in place. And we're going to be saddled with those regulations and liabilities really for infinity, right? We're held liable for any issues environmentally that landfill will cause long before 30 or 50 years after closure. Is that a fair statement, Jeff?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So if we could find somebody like a Republic that would be willing to take that liability off our hands, because I'm assuming we will be paying approximately $3 million a year just for upkeep and maintenance for those EPA violations or corrections that we have to make that we're currently making from now on.
For the analysis that we did, we had a cost for closure of the C&D landfill, and then we estimated the continuing ongoing cost year by year for the closed Class 1 and for the future closed C&D landfill that we had. And over a 20-year period, our estimation was about $11.7 million, which is...
So $2 million a year.
Yeah, and that's assuming that everything stays status quo and that there's not a larger issue that develops.
Or internal stability issue or, right, okay. So we're on the hook approximately $2 million a year for the next 11 years if nothing happens.
The 11.7 million was over the 20, was the total for 20 years.
Okay.
Now, and we used a 20-year period to compare to the other options out there.
Right.
We're, under $1 million a year.
But you see my point. We're going to spend a lot of money on something that's closed that we are liable for basically forever. And it's an environmental issue. And
that's correct.
It could get worse. Okay.
Yeah, having that waste removed and moved into a line cell is a big advantage. It's been quantified by, Jeff's numbers and put in the analysis that way. But again, it could burp more. It probably won't burp less. I mean, but it could burp more. That's a risk. And anyway, that's part of the offer. That's an attractive aspect of the term sheet.
Harvey, I think we really have to look at this. There's so many variables that, you do have the existing liability of existing structures within not only the counties but the city. We've got landfills that we're dealing with inside the city. But in my opinion, I think we've got a couple of options. I think as an advisory board, we have to determine. I love the idea of the municipalities getting together under some kind of memorandum of understandings to even determine what a solid waste authority looks like. I think it's tough for us to say that until the individual bodies can sit down and talk about that. But this is more of an overall, and Harvey he's heard me say this over the last 3 or 4 weeks. I think the solution we need to look at is a solution that we're not putting the elected officials back in this same spot 20 years from now to be determining the same thing that we're talking about now. I think we need to, whether it's max flex, whatever that is, we need to somehow figure out what those options are that were progressive, not only as the county but as the cities, to come up with a true long-term solution. So I think we have a couple of different steps. The first step is the committees to determine if the Solid Waste Authority is something we want to consider, and the steps to consider that, and then once that's considered, what those different options are. Does that sound close?
I agree that the organizational, arrangement is important to make first, and get that going. We recommended pursuing 2 tracks on the 2 different, management approaches. And Middle Point 2.0 is more of a, fairly long medium term, option. It's not forever. But it has some, attractiveness to it for reasons we're talking about. But these are your decisions, not mine. We were asked to make recommendations. But pursuing the max flex at the same time, puts you, if for some reason the numbers that come out of Middle Point 2.0 aren't what we think they are, and you just don't want to do it, you're on a track with a Southern Transfer Station, implementing other services, and you can think about the North Transfer Station, being wherever at that point, a year from now.
And we could have industrial users that may want to, if we wanted to, when we say that max flex, it could be waste to energy with a possible industrial user.
You could think about trying to, use your waste as an economic development tool to attract industry. Air-conditioned data centers are a great user of chilled water, and use energy. That's something to look at. Making, fuels, synthetic fuels that can be used in transportation vehicles. That's another, another approach. Again, while all this is going on, you should, be thinking about what recycling and diversion programs make sense for you to have that incorporated. I'm being reminded about zero waste planning. It's good. Well, what's the definition of zero waste? Is it zero waste, no waste? Do we end up with no waste at all to do anything with, or are we talking about zero waste to landfill? My definition is more zero waste to landfill. The less that we end up having in a landfill that we have to make bigger over time, I think we're better off. Now, how you get there is a big question. Policies and programs can only get so far. They can't take care of all the waste. We will have waste at the end of the day. So to implement very aggressive recycling diversion programs cost a lot of money. A lot of zero waste planning that's done by others don't get into the costs as much as we do when we're asked what these programs cost. Now, If you're willing to, pay for that extra cost to get, maximum diversion, then, then that can be done. Having an organics collection at home, yard waste with food waste from the kitchen. If you want to have a composting site, an anaerobic digestion site, that's a viable technical option to produce methane, biomethane that you can use in trucks. That's technically feasible. It's expensive. It's technically feasible. It's under the cost of a regional waste energy project. It doesn't take care of everything. You can't organically make a rock get smaller in volume or weight. You can't digest a rock. And our waste has rocks in it, glass. You can't digest this. You can recycle that, but you can't digest it. So you've got to, apply the appropriate technology to the portions of waste. We have a lot of organic waste in our waste stream, 25%. You can use your garbage disposals for organic waste and have them go to the wastewater treatment plant also. You can collect source-separated organics, take the packaging off, and deliver it to the wastewater treatment plant like you do septage, if the plant has capacity. These all are management options that you can do as part of looking at recycling. Collecting that stuff separately costs money, and you have to affect and cause it to be separately, set out and be collected. And that's getting into recycling programs. But at the end of the day, you will have stuff left over that has to be disposed of. Whether it's 80,000 tons out of the 280 or 200,000 tons out of the 280 in the county. And the more you want diverted, the higher your cost will be. But those are choices that you can make as you're thinking about, where's what's left going to go. And you'd want to set up where it's going to go on a per ton basis so that you're not being charged for not using capacity in disposal. That's one of the disadvantages of participating in a waste energy plant is you may guess what capacity you need wrong, not taking into account what you can divert more economically and having to pay for capacity that's sitting unused. It needs to be paid for because it was built for you. That's a very important decision, the size of the plant that you decide to build and what portion you're responsible for. Garbage is pretty complicated at the, when, we put it out every day, or we put some in our barrels or our bins or wherever every day, and it disappears from our curb. We drop it off at the recycling center and it's gone. But, when you try to think about doing it in a better way, it gets very, very complicated.
Harvey, I think you've just done a great job of laying out why we probably need a solid waste authority of some kind to focus solely on those issues and not be distracted by other issues that cities and counties are responsible for. One of the things I like about it is the transparency of it having a standalone budget. So anyone can see, every person who lives in this county could see what it's costing to manage the waste that we're generating. It, I think, could make it more real to us, what we're spending, in addition to the negatives that people, particularly who live in the proximity of the landfill that we have right now, experience. In a way, it kind of spreads the pain. We're all feeling it anyway, but it's impossible to tell exactly what it is unless you are hiring a private contractor. I'm in a I live out in the county, and I pay somebody for my recycling, to handle my recycling. I take the rest of my garbage to the convenience center, to the recycling center. I compost my kitchen waste, so my 25% is pulled out and goes into my garden ultimately. Not everybody can do all of those things. Not everybody wants to do all of those things, but I think it's important for us all to be able to see the effect of the decisions that we're making, and I think that would be one of the big advantages of it. But the other, again, is all of those things that you just went through that somebody needs to be thinking about all the time if we're going to move away from the way we've been doing things in the past, if we're going to do what Mike said about recycling, if we're going to manage ourselves out of having an immense landfill, either in our county or somebody else's county and bearing the expense of having to haul it there, we need people who are responsible for thinking about that every day. It can be. All right, I'm happy to make the motion to move in the direction, take the steps to move in the direction of exploring the option and ultimately forming a solid waste authority for the governments of this county, beginning with adoption of some memorandums of understanding among the local governments, laying out what they need to have on paper to feel comfortable participating in that process. That makes sense. And anybody's welcome to amend that.
All right, so we're not going to use Robert's Rules of Order. We'll just use Harvey's Rules of Order. And I turn it over to others to see if there's any comments on that motion that's been made and seconded. I'll just ask for a show of hands. Do people like that motion? Raise your hand, say yes. I think that's pretty much almost everyone on the council. So I think that passes. All right, that's very good. That's very good. I'm proud of you. That's very good. I will say that when I look at authorities around the country, they have caused, I mean, most of them, a lot of them were implemented to implement waste energy plants once upon a time. But as they did that and recycling came along, those authorities have, by numbers, higher recycling rates going on while they have their waste energy projects also. And they're able to affect the programs and services more because they organized as an authority to do that because they had a landfill dump crisis a long time ago. But they had an organization that was flexible and focused on solid waste and made other programs and services happen. You know, you're in kind of you're not doing this for a waste energy facility. You're doing this, you know, just for a better system because things are changing. And I think it's a very good direction. Let's talk more about the management options. Excuse me, system management options. What you would do besides the recycling stuff. Thank you.
I think earlier Mayor McFarland alluded to not kicking the can down the road 20 years or more, and I guess, and I apologize, this question's already been asked and answered because I'm kind of coming in late, but what assurances do we have if we start taking this to an outside county location that in 20 years that they're full up, or, you know, because nobody wants garbage, whether it be here, whether it be another county or another state or something like that. I'm just concerned that we embark on one set path right now, then, you know, we bought a few years for us.
You will always need access to a landfill for some portion of the waste. If you have a waste energy plant as part of your system, anaerobic digestion as part of your system, the most robust recycling, you know, as part of your system, there's going to be residues from those operations as well as waste that, you know, as you grow, you know, comes on that you can't put through those systems. So you always need a landfill for residuals as well as disposals. And yes, landfills fill up, and large landfills in rural counties, you know, get expanded. You know, and they're available. They may be further away. You may have to access them by rail. Boston, Massachusetts sends sludge to Utah. The waste energy plant in Maryland rails ash to, you know, Virginia, 200 miles away. So there's other ways to get, and those are economical options. Because once it's on a train, you know, it's easier to go 1,000 miles than 50 miles, you know, once it's on the train. So those, just as an examples. So those are things that you would look at as time changes and have to pay what you have to pay. But if you develop a system that's reduced the amount of waste destined for disposal, that element becomes less of your budget. if you will.
Harvey, if I could add, one of the example landfills that might get hauled to that's in your document, there's one in northern Alabama with more than 100 years of capacity right now. These are there are mega landfills that localities like yourself haul to when they don't have local capacity. So it's not a guarantee, but these are different caliber of facilities too.
Okay. Are we, any other motions? How was that box lunch? Oh, another one. You got another motion?
No, I'm not going to make another motion, but I would ask if, you know, over the course of the last year or so, we've gotten a lot of really good materials that came from other places where you've done work before.
Right.
With a lot of good information about a lot of different kinds of strategies. And my question is, could we incorporate more of that into our final report to inform us as we move forward, to kind of keep in front of us what some of those options are? You're the experts, and I don't know, maybe our mayors are going to find some experts to focus on this from here forward, but in case it's just lay people like me, I think it'd be helpful if we had a little bit more of a catalog here
All
of
right,
the kinds
so
of things we should be thinking about.
So you're basically asking for an appendix to this report that describes all the technologies that are out there and the collection service. We happen to have a chapter just like that we can add to this as an appendix. We've, I don't, did you read the Maui plan? I take it. That information's dated. We've since did some planning in other places, and we have a nice chapter we can add that will basically say this is the state of the art of collection practices, storage, conversion, waste energy, landfills, anaerobic digestion, all the technologies that we reviewed.
I think that's important not just for whoever's going to be managing this process moving forward, but I think it's important to the residents of the county to know that those things are there
Okay.
and that they're being given serious consideration.
We can add that. That's done. That's a very good suggestion. It's hard to understand the status from, the PowerPoint slides. If you heard us say what we said, you might remember, but it's good to have a little bit of a reference. That's good.
Harvey, I have a couple of cost questions on 2.0
Yes.
report. Well, earlier you talked about the two hills being combined in the county and the Middle Point landfill, the two hills being combined in between. That's a good word picture there, good picture. From a contractual agreement, we've got the host agreement now.
Correct.
I'm reading that a couple of things like tipping fees for the city and the county would start at $24 and start as early as 2020.
Correct.
Right now under the host agreement, until that expires, there are no tipping fees for the city and county. So
Correct. When Middle Point, as it exists now, is full and closes, the host community agreements go away. So the free disposal is gone, and the city and the county would need to make other arrangements for where it's 80,000 tons per year go, and other haulers in the county would have to find a place for the tons they deliver to Middle Point where it would go. And we reflected that in the numbers.
Okay, but you say when it expires, but if we do the 2.0 and that were to take place in the next year or so, then that host agreement is affected, because again, the note I'm looking at says that
Right.
they start in 2020. So
Right. The term that's in there is, switches from the current host agreement to the new host agreement. So there are revenues that come from the new host agreement, and they're reflected in there too. It's actually they kind of wash, the host agreement and the disposal rate kind of wash out each other. They kind of offset if you look at those numbers.
Under 2.0, we continue to take trash from other counties as well.
Republic would have the ability to keep waste coming in from their own sources as well as other contracts they have with other local governments or contractors. And right now, that's about 900,000 tons per year. And 280,000 roughly comes from within the county, 80 of which is controlled by the city and the county, Murfreesboro City and the county.
Additional 15 years is still at a rate while we're bringing in that
At that
900,000
rate.
or 1 million tons a year at that rate.
Correct.
being
It's
estimated for
assumed
the-
at that rate. It didn't adjust, the rate. We did project more tonnage as time goes on that, from within the county, because you're a growing county. And, we use the economic forecast that you've got out there, and it's all documented. And the other thing that is in the term sheet is that if residential services are provided through authority members, they would have that rate also, the lower rate, the $24 rate or whatever rate ended up being after the agreement would be finally negotiated. And that could be for more tonnage than the current tonnage, but it would be through authority members.
The royalty fee of $1.20 per ton goes away also?
The current royalty or the new one? The current would go away. There aren't two royalty, it's either one or the other. But we had when Middle Point closes, the royalty goes away in the forecast. It went away in the no asset one, it went away in the Max Flex, and it went away in the Regional Waste Energy one. Only in the Middle Point 2.0 is there another host fee paid into the future beyond 10 years. Do you follow that? The host fee changes in a few years out versus 10 years. Middle Point 2.0, it changes to the new structure sooner than when Middle Point closes without consolidation. That would change in 10 years.
Thank you.
But we would need to look at, we're seeing the cost of how it would change, but we need to take into effect, if we do the midpoint 2.0, the cost that it would be saving the county on the liability of our current county landfill.
We have that in there. We have that, oh yeah, we have that savings in there. We didn't put that cost in that system option because it doesn't exist. The county would not have to close the C&D landfill and, worry about post-closure. So we didn't put that cost in the Middle Point 2.0. That's one of the reasons why that option's costs come down. There's 11 million that went away.
Exactly.
In the other options, that's in there. In all the three others, the closure, post-closure for the county landfill is in those costs.
Right, and us as a body sitting here, we know that, but to get the public to understand that potentially every year, if we do nothing, the liability that it does to the county, that we will always forever and ever have to, as county citizens, have to pay for the county landfill closure.
Right.
And so I understand taking it out, but you also, sometimes we need to be reminded
Right.
of something that is no longer there when we have gotten a benefit for it. It's something that we're not liable for, and we've become on the hook quite a bit for closing the landfill.
That's a unique selling point of Middle Point 2.0.
Sounds, Harvey, like we might be winding down here, so I'm going to make one last request. I have the utmost confidence that I will be reelected next term as county commissioner, but in the rare situation that I may not, would you please put in your notes that I would make a request that when we do pick, and I don't mean we as this board, but however someone decides to appoint the new solid waste Authority Board, that we, I'm going to suggest that we, as a friend to that board, that somebody from the Chamber Industrial Development Board be a regular guest to those meetings, primarily so those two bodies can communicate for the hopes to find an end user of energy. So maybe we can find a large user that perhaps could help us expedite a waste-to-energy facility.
Could have someone from that organization, you know, be a member of the board, be one of the people appointed by the county or the city. So you make sure that, you know, that's thought about. That's a very good point. And you could, the authorities often have advisory committees also that run across citizens, you know, groups, business, you know, industry, government, you know, to advise the board, to think about things, help the board think about things, so that there's, you know, more input along the way than just staff and advisors.
I have another question, comment. What is the time frame, and this may be for more of Mayor Burgess, what is the time frame on us given on the Midpoint 2.0, they want to see, you keep talking about to make sure their budget items or whatever they have brought to the table for us. What is the time frame on getting that started? I know we have to set up this solid waste authority, but could we go ahead and just allow them in to start doing some research to see if that is even going to be an option prior to the finalization of the solid waste authority?
I think the mayor's going to answer that question.
Well, if this Solid Waste Advisory Committee makes a recommendation and we get consensus agreement to ask our county commission to give them permission to do this, that's what it's going to take. And then they'll have to make the decision if they choose to address that or not.
Yeah, Public Services wants to do it. They're ready to do it. There needs to be an agreement between Republic Services and the county, and the mayor has just asked you whether or not you want to make a recommendation as a council to help the county decide about doing that. Yeah, you don't, what Kate's whispering to me is the following. Go ahead, Kate.
I just want to make sure, I believe you're asking specifically, does an authority have to be created before Republic can be allowed to do their testing? And the answer is no. The county has to allow it, but you don't have to have the authority in place. And I believe the mayor is saying if this body will say, yes, we think you should at least do the testing, that will help in the decision-making process for the county.
Well, I believe
correct,
I'll
sir?
go ahead and put that out there for us to go ahead and ask the county commission to look into it. That puts nothing in stone and nothing is signed on the dotted line as for this is a done deal. It's just allowing for more research on it. And I do believe it's a way that we need to go as a county for doing that. So, yes.
All right, so there's a motion that the commission encourages the county to look into Middle Point 2.0, allow Republic Services to do its investigation at the county landfill so it can firm up its offer. Am I saying that right? And there's a second. Anyone want to discuss it? Okay, I'd like to see a show of hands for if people are in favor of that or not. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That looks like more than a simple majority. So I'd say that. Can I say that motion passed? Okay, I'm going to say that motion passed. We've got 2 motions. That's good. I'm proud of you again. I think that's a good decision to keep that on the table. Any other motions? Anyone want to make a motion about reduce, reuse, recycle? Hint, 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 hint. I mean, you've all expressed a strong desire that that be this part of the scope of the future. I'm asking if you want to formalize that in some way. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, if you will, but, you know, just in, you know, in terms of, you know, something like,
Doesn't that become the role of the authority?
well, this could be part of your guidance to the authority, you know, to an authority that may be formed. This could be part of what's in the MOU, or maybe you could just wait till the MOU to talk about that.
Personally, that makes more sense to me.
Okay, okay. People agree with that? Keep it in the MOU? Okay, all right. Anything else for a motion? All right, just one last, anyone need another card? Everyone got a card? I'm hoping we'll get some back. We got some back, good. It looks like a dozen or so. Very good. All right, are we done? Wow, is it 9 o'clock yet? So we want to thank you for your attention at the 3 workshops. I hope you feel this has been a productive time. You know, from hearing the discussion, I think that people have learned a lot. We will wrap up this report with the motions and another appendix that describes technologies and processes and so on, as requested. And that will sit there until the motions are acted upon and go from there. Do we need a motion to close, Mayor? All right. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.